Pizza, pizza. Okay, well, pizza time. It's time for the iterator pizza question. So basically what we're doing here is we are creating an order list for Artichokes Pizza. If you haven't been to Berkeley because of the online stuff, Artichokes is a pizza place that's here. It's pretty good. They serve these flavors of pizza, as is in the question. They used to have this like crab pizza, but it wasn't very good in my opinion. Anyway, these are the main three types of pizza they serve. Please come to go to Artichokes next time you're in Berkeley and everything. But anyways, let's look at the actual question and try to figure it out. Okay, so basically what's happening here is that Artichokes Pizza has these three types of pizza. They have pizza 0, pizza 1, and pizza 2, right? Artichoke, margarita, meatball, but we're just calling 0, 1, 2. And they're getting a bunch of different orders from people. Someone says, oh, give me 2 slices of 2, or give me a slice of 1, give me a slice of 0, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all coming in some random order, right? Maybe they come in as a string like this. Well, you, as the pizza chef, realize it's probably pretty inefficient to, get a slice of 0, then a slice of 1, then a slice of 2, then a slice of 1. So you want to combine them all together, right? You want to get a list like this and then say, okay, I want, 3 0 slices, 2 1 slices, and 1 2 slice, right? That's basically all that we're trying to do. So I'm assuming that you've read this question on your own, but basically what we want to do is we want to have a iterator that, as we call next, is going to tell us the next pizza type that we need and how many of that pizza type, right? So we're going to feed in an array like this. It's going to count up the numbers, and then we call next, we're going to get artichoke 3, because see, artichoke is pizza number 0, margarita 2, because margarita is pizza number 2, and then meatball 1, because meatball is pizza number 2, right? And those numbers after each pizza are how many slices of each you need. Okay, again, I'm assuming you've already read the problem. There's also a typo here. It says it wants to print out like no spaces here, but you can like put a space or whatever. Okay, anyways, so let's look at the actual structure of this class. One thing here that I think is a little bit weird about the problem is they say basically you want to implement an iterator called menu iterator that's going to do this task I just described. Make sure it adheres to the standard iterator rules. Okay, what are the standard iterator rules? The main one that you have to know is that an iterator is non-destructive. So if you iterate, for example, let's say you iterate over an int array, right? And you just print out every element in the int array. You do not want to destroy the int array as you do it, right? Or you iterate over a linked list, right? You don't want to rebind any pointers as you do it, because you want to have as many iterators as you possibly can. It should be something that's external to the class. So in this case, basically what we have is, if we look at the class, we have this menu, which is just the names of the individual pizzas. We're not going to worry about that too much. We're going to have this array, which is order counts, which is going to be a size 3 array with elements 0, 1, 2. Each one of these represents a different type of pizza, and by default, they all have 0 in them. And we're going to have an index, which is going to tell us which one we're on. So if this kind of array here is the actual thing we're iterating over, then the iterator is going to basically be like a pointer on top of it. It's not literally going to be a pointer, but the point is, right, let's say you have an array like this and you make an iterator, you want to have a pointer on top of it. That way, if you move the iterator to the next thing, and then you create like a second iterator, it can just point at the first thing. You can have multiple iterators going if you want. They won't interfere with each other. It doesn't matter. And it won't destroy the actual array that it's iterating over, so you can do it as many times as you want. Anyways, let's look at this problem again. So starting out, we have this array all initiated to zeros, because when you create an int array, by default, everything inside of it is a 0. And we also have this index variable. This index variable is also going to be set to 0 by default, because when you set an int by default, it will be 0. So basically, let's look at the task at hand. So we need to take in an array, an int array like this, an array of pizza orders that we want. We need to process it. In other words, we need to take this array and then use it to update this array, which will tell us how many of each order we have. That's like the pre-process step. And then every time we call next, we want to spit out another index of this. So first we want to spit out index 0, then 1, then 2. Okay. So there's 2 basic steps here. Pre-process the initial array, and then implement next and has next, basically. Okay. There's a little line on top of that for some reason. Okay, anyways. Other things to notice about the structure of this class. This class implements iterator. Iterator is an interface, and it requires that you have these two methods, hasNext and next. Next is the method that is going to be responsible for actually returning the next set of orders. So it's the thing that's actually going to be responsible for printing out, artichoke 3, margarita 2, right, which is based off this array here. And then hasNext is just a Boolean. It's going to tell us, is there a next to call? Because the way that we might use an iterator like this is we would say usually something like while hasNext, and then we would just call next or something like that, right? So long as there's a next thing to call, we're just gonna, get it. So that's why it's useful to have like the Boolean hasNext. Okay, so let's look at the first step, right? The pre-processing first. First things first, we want to be able to take an input array like this one and somehow transform it into an element 3 array like this that tells us how many of each slice we want. So we're going to do that in the constructor of the iterator. So all you have to do here is iterate through this array and then just update the indices. So notice that this takes an integer array called orders. So all I am going to do is basically say for int I, it's actually an integer array instead of an int array, but I believe you can still say int I. For int I equals 0, I less than orders.length, I++. We're just going to iterate through the array. And what are we going to do? Well, we want to increment these order counts variables. So we're just going to say order counts. If there's an underscore there. Order counts of the index of orders I is equal to itself plus 1. Okay, we just did a lot in that line, but let's actually go through this array and consider what happens. So let's say that the orders array is this array up here, and we're going to iterate through the array. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get element 0 of this array, which is just the number 0, right? So this is just saying get element 0 of the order array, which is number 0. So then this whole thing evaluates 0. So all it's saying is, okay, order count at index 0 is going to be equal to itself plus 1. So that's going to change this into 1, right? Which means, of course, we want to order 1 slice of artichoke pizza, but we did that just by passing in the number 0. And then I'll just do another example. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to get index 1 of this order array, which is going to evaluate to number 2. So this is going to say order counts of 2, it's itself plus 1. We go to order count index 2 and do itself plus 1. Yeah, so that's basically what we're going to do. And I won't do the rest of them by hand. You can be yourself if you want to prove it to yourself, but we are going to end up with 3 here, 2 here, and 1 here. So this now represents the number of slices of each pizza that we want. And we did it just with this for loop. So keep in mind, this is the constructor. So this is the thing that is done when we first declare the iterator. So, before we can do anything else, before we call hasNext or next, this array is already created. And we want it that way because we want to iterate over the elements in this array. So we want to make sure that the moment it's created, we have our setup done. Okay, so let's look at the next thing. So now we actually want to iterate through the array. But it's not quite as simple as doing what we did up here, right? We're not just going to have a for loop and then print out every order because we want to return one element at a time, right? And we want to return it as a string index, right? We want to print out artichoke 3, which is this, margarita 2, meatball 1, just like this, one element at a time. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, we know our index starts at 0, and we clearly want to start printing out artichoke first. We want to start with the 0th element of the array. So I'm going to basically do that. So let's just say I want to do return. I want to return a string. So I'm going to return from menu because that is the string array that has all the names in it. I want to return menu of index. Then I want to add a space in there, so plus a space. You'll sometimes see it written like this, just so it's clear it's a space. And then I also want to do order contents, or order counts is what it's called, sorry. Order counts of index. So this whole thing will basically evaluate, at least when index is 0, to menu of 0, which is artichoke. So it'll say artichoke plus a space, and then it will say order counts index, which is 0. So this is going to evaluate to 3, so we'll say artichoke 3. But there might be a problem, you notice here, and that's what happens the next time we call next. Well, index, right, is not getting updated. So you could, for example, try to update index in hasNext, but that only works if you call hasNext before you call next, and we don't necessarily know that's the case. So we want to find a way to both return the pizza and also increment the index so there's 1 next time around. So here's how you do that. Instead of returning right here, we're going to have a string. I'll just call it S, which is going to be equal to the thing we just made. Then we are going to say index equals itself plus 1, and then we return string. This is a really, really common thing you see in iterators. This is how most next methods are written in iterators, where you basically get the thing that you want, then set up your index or whatever you need for the next iteration so that you don't have to worry about that, and then return the thing you want. It's this 3-step process. This is very, very common. You'll see this all the time. Most of the work in iterators usually happens in this next method. So try to be aware of this kind of 3-step process, because it will be very useful if you know how to do it. You'll see it over and over again. Okay, final thing we have to do is we just have to do hasNext. Okay, so hasNext basically, we want to say we don't have a next when we reach the end of this array, right? So that means that it's actually relatively simple to do our hasNext, because we have this index which tells us what element of the array we're on. We can get how long the array is. So all we have to do is return index less than menu.length. Right, so the second that this index goes to 4, if we call hasNext, it will say, oh, sorry, it doesn't have a next anymore. This will start returning false, right? And you don't have to worry about people calling next when there is no next, right? If some user just called next like 10 times in a row, it would obviously error, right? Because you're going to eventually get an array out of bounds exception if you try to start doing these kinds of things. You don't have to worry about that. The idea is that the user should be using the hasNext to tell if something is out of bounds. Okay, but that's everything. That's basically how you do this. That's how this iterator works. And I hope this is somewhat helpful.